All right. On March the Saints, the life of Saint Hilarion the Great. Starting in chapter 21. These are short chapters, so we're going to flow through quite a few of these real quick. In another year, when he was about to go out to visit the monastery for the harvest, he was drawing up a list of whom they could stay with and whom they would simply visit in passing, when some of the monks suggested that they stay with a certain brother whom they knew to be rather niggardly, hoping thereby to cure him of his faults. "Why are you showing yourselves up in such a bad light?" asked Hilarion, "in your desire to irritate your brother?" The brother in question, on hearing of this, was ashamed, and somewhat unwillingly was overcome by the force of public opinion, and asked for his name to be put on the list of places where the visitors might stay. When they arrived at his place on the 10th day, they found that there were guards in his vineyard, armed with slings and stones and clods of earth to keep off intruders, as if it belonged to somebody else. Without picking any grapes, they departed the next day, but Hilarion had a smile on his lips, pretending not to know what was going on. And when they went to the next monk, whose name was Savas, we do not mind naming him as he was generous, though we would not dream of naming the niggardly one. They were all invited into the vineyard to refresh themselves with some grapes after the trials of their journey. Now it was Sunday and long before the usual hour for taking food. "We cannot approve of refreshing the body before seeing to the needs of the soul," said Hilarion. "Let us pray, let us sing psalms, let us offer God service, and then let us enjoy your hospitality." When the service was over, he stood by the vineyard and blessed it and dismissed his flock to their pasture. There must have been at least 3,000 of them. The usual estimate for this vineyard was that it would produce 100 bottles. But on the 20th day after this, it was found to have produced 300. The niggardly brother gathered as much less than usual, and he was distressed to find that even what he had produced had turned to vinegar. And this is what Hilarion had predicted to many of the brothers beforehand. Chapter 22. What he detested above all was the way some monks lacked faith in their future and saved up their possessions, worrying too much about how much their clothing was going to cost or any other such transitory worldly item. So he ceased to even look at one of the monks, who lived about 5 miles away, because he knew that this monk had jealously guarded his little garden through which he had saved up a little bit of money. This monk, wishing to be restored to the Gironda's favor, often visited the brothers, especially Hesychios, who was particularly dear to Hilarion. So one day he brought with him a bundle of green chickpeas, which Hesychios put on the table as part of the evening meal. "What is this horrid stench?" exclaimed the Gironda. "Where did this come from?" "A brother brought it as a gift of first fruits for the monastery," replied Hesychios. "Can you not smell the foul odor?" he asked. "And what these chickpeas stink of is avarice. Give it to the oxen, give it to the brute beasts, and see whether they will eat it." In obedience to Hilarion's command, he did as he was told and put it in the manger. The oxen were terrified, lowed unusually loud, broke their tethers, and fled in different directions. The Gironda had this gift of being able to tell from the smell of anyone's body or clothing or anything that he had touched what sort of demon or vice was lurking within him. In the 63rd year of his life, the Gironda gazed out upon the great monastery and the large number of brothers, of which he was the spiritual father, and saw how great crowds of people constantly came to them with various sicknesses or unclean spirits. The desert round about was filled with all kinds of people, so that he wept daily and was filled with an overwhelming nostalgia for his former way of life. The brothers asked him what was the matter, what was troubling him. "I have returned to the world," he said, "and I have received my reward in this life. All Palestine and the neighboring provinces think I am somebody important, and I, under the excuse of building a monastery for the use of the brothers, possess a large mansion and everything that goes with it." The brothers tended him with extra care, especially Hesychios, whose veneration and love for him knew no bounds. Chapter 24. After he had mourned like that for 2 years, Aristoneta came to visit him. She was the wife of the prefect whom we have already mentioned, though without the prefect's vaunting ambition. She told Hilarion that she was intending to visit Anthony. That is where I would like to go to, he said, weeping. If I were to if I were not held prisoner in this monastery, and if it were fruitful to do so, for 2 days ago the world was deprived of this great father. She believed him and went no further. In a few days, someone brought the news that Anthony had indeed fallen asleep. Chapter 25. Marvelous were the miracles importance which he did. Marvelous his incredible abstinence, his knowledge, and his humility. I am never so overcome with amazement as when I think how he was completely unaffected by all the glory and honor paid to him. For bishops flocked to him, and presbyters, crowds of clerics and monks, Christian matrons, a great source of temptation, crowds of ordinary people from the towns in countryside, judges and people in high places, all wanting to receive from him a portion of the bread or oil which he blessed. But he thought continually of nothing else but solitude. One day he suddenly made up his mind to set out. He saddled an ass and set out on his journey, for he was so exhausted by fasting that he could hardly walk. When it was rumored about that he was leaving Palestine for the desert vastness, more than 10,000 people of all ages and sexes gathered together in an attempt to stop him. He was unmoved by their entreaties as he talked with them, striking the sand with his staff. I will not make God a liar. 1 John 1:10. He said, I shall not see the overthrow of the churches, the altars broken, or the blood of my sons poured out. Those who heard him say this understood Those who heard him say this understood that some secret had been revealed to them which he was unwilling to express in total. But nevertheless, they surrounded him to prevent him going any further. In a loud voice, he argued with them, saying that he would take no food or drink until they let him pass. After 7 days growing weaker because of the fasting, he was allowed to say farewell to most of them and move on to the town of Bethalia, still accompanied by quite a multitude. There he succeeded in persuading the crowds to turn back, but chose 40 monks to stay with him, who carried with them food for the journey, and who were practiced in fasting, that is, refraining from food till after sunset. On the 5th day, he arrived at Pelusium and visited the brothers in a neighboring desert place called Lycnos. 3 days later, he arrived at the fortress of Thebatum, where he saw Dracon, Drac, Dracontios. That's a weird name. Some of these people have such weird names. I'm sorry. It's not my fault. The bishop and confessor who was in exile there. The bishop was incredibly delighted at meeting such a great man. After another 3 days, he arrived at Babylon, where he met Bishop Philo, who was also a confessor. They had both been exiled to these places by the Emperor Constantius, who favored the Arian heresy. 2 days after leaving there, he got to the town of Aphroditos, where he met up with the deacon Bassanes. Here he obtained camels, the only possible means of transport through the waterless desert, for he now told his brothers that he intended to observe the anniversary of Anthony's death by keeping a night's vigil in the place where the saint had died. After 3 further days in the vast and terrible desert, he arrived at Anthony's high mountain, where he found 2 monks, Isaac and Pelusianus, Anthony's interpreters and attendants. Chapter 26. Now that we have got to this point in our story and the occasion presents itself, it seems right to describe briefly the place where the great man lived. It is a rocky mountain about a mile high, with gushing springs among its spurs. Some of the water soaks away into the sand, but the rest of it falls away to form a small stream. On either bank, there are great numbers of palm trees, lending charm to the place as well as usefulness. Anthony's disciples took Hilarion with them here and there to show him everything. This is where he would sing his psalms, they said. Here he would pray, here work, here he would rest out when tired. These vines he planted himself as well as these little trees. He made this garden bed with his own hands. Much toil went into the making of this pond, which irrigates his little garden. And here is the hoe which he used for many years to cultivate the ground with. Hilarion lay down on Anthony's bed and embraced the covers as if they were still warm. This was a little cell, square-shaped cell, just big enough for a man to stretch out in the and lie down. There were two other cells of the same size at the top of the mountain, which could only be reached by climbing up like a snail with a great deal of effort. Anthony used to escape here to get away from visitors in the company of his disciples. These cells had been cut out of the living rock and were furnished with doors. The disciples then led him to the orchard. See this garden with its green vegetables, said Isaac. About 3 years ago, a herd of wild donkeys caused great damage to it. Anthony ordered the leader of them to stand still, belabored him with his stick, and asked it how he dared to eat that which it had not sowed. After that, they often came to drink from the stream, but never touched the vegetables of the garden. Hilarion asked them if they could show him Anthony's burial place. They took Hilarion aside, and whether they showed him the tomb or not is unknown. For in accordance with Anthony's instructions, the grave was kept secret to prevent Pergamios, a very rich man of the district, from coming to take the body to his villa and making a martyr shrine for it. 27. He returned to Aphroditos and, keeping only two of the brothers with him, remained nearby in the desert for a while, using such abstinence and silence as if he were only just beginning to serve Christ. The surrounding country had been suffering from a drought for the previous 3 years, and the people said that even the elements were mourning the death of Anthony. Hilarion's fame was well known to the farmers round about, and both men and women, their lips bloodless and their bodies wasted with hunger, urgently begged the servant of Christ, as the successor of the blessed Anthony, to pray for rain. Seeing their plight, Hilarion was filled with compassion, and raising his eyes to heaven, stretching out both his hands, he immediately prayed for what they had asked. The rains fell on the dry and thirsty land, but strange to say, it also brought forth a multitude of serpents and poisonous beasts, which bit a great number of people. Had they not run immediately to Hilarion for help, they would have died, for he blessed some oil and anointed the wounds of the shepherds and farmers and restored them to health. Chapter 28. He was showered with praise as a result, so he fled to Alexandria, intending to go on from there to the oasis of the desert. And since he had never stayed in a city in all this time since he had become a monk, he went to certain brothers whom he knew in Bruchium, not far from Alexandria, who received him with great joy. It was not long before night began to fall when they suddenly saw Hilarion's disciples saddling the donkey and preparing the departure. They fell at Hilarion's feet, begging him not to go. They lay down across their doorways, saying that they would rather die than to lose such a guest. I was just thinking that I had better move on, said Hilarion, lest I cause you a great deal of trouble. Future events will show you that I was right to leave you so suddenly. The next day, people came from Gaza with the prefect's officers, and searched the monastery looking for him. It is true that we have heard about him, they said, when they found no trace of him. He is a magician and can tell the future. For after Hilarion had left Palestine, Julian had succeeded as emperor, and the people of Gaza had destroyed his monastery and begged the new emperor that Hilarion and Hesychios be put to death. It was decreed that both should be sought for throughout the whole world. But he had already left Bruchium and set out for the oasis throughout the trackless desert. He stayed there for about a year, but even there his fame had preceded him. There seemed to be nowhere in the east where he could hide, and he considered the possibility of sailing to some desert island. Even though there was nowhere to hide on land, he thought that perhaps the sea might be able to conceal him. Chapter 29. But just then, Hilarianus, his disciple, came from Palestine, saying that Julian had been killed, that a Christian emperor now reigned, and that he ought to return to what was left of his monastery. But Hilarion would hear none of it, and instead went westward on a camel to the seaside town of Paratonium in Libya, where Hadrianus, in an ill-fated desire to return to Palestine, betrayed Hilarion grievously. For he thought to acquire for himself some of the glory which had earlier belonged to his master, packed up all the goods which the brothers had put in his care, and set off without Hilarion's knowledge. This is a convenient place for me to relate something which might strike terror into the hearts of those who do not respect their masters. For it was not long after this that Hadrianus was stricken with leprosy and turned into a mass of corruption. Chapter 30. He still had with him Xananus, and together they took ship for Sicily, knowing he could pay for the passage by selling a copy of the Gospels, which he had copied out himself as a young man. In the middle of the Adriatic, the captain's son was possessed by a demon and began to shout loudly, Hilarion, servant of God, why cannot we even be safe from you in the middle of the sea? Give me a bit of breathing space till we get to land, lest you cast me out and I fall into the abyss. If my God allows you to stay, said Hilarion, well, stay. But if he casts you out, why should you blame me, penniless sinner that I am? He said this to discourage the sailors as well as the merchants who were aboard from handing him over when they got to land. The boy was purged of the demon not long after that, and his father and the others who were there gave their word that they would not reveal the name of the saint to anyone at a later date. When they docked at the Cape of Pacinum, in Sicily, he offered the gospel to the captain as payment for his passage, but he would not accept it, especially as he could see that apart from that book and the clothes they stood up, that's a weird way of saying that. Okay. So apart from that book and the clothes they stood up in, they possessed absolutely nothing. But the Gironda was quite happy to put his faith in being poor, rejoicing all the more in possessing nothing of this world, and that he should be thought as a beggar by those he came into contact with. Thinking the matter over, he feared lest the merchants from the east might make his name known. So he fled from the coast some 20 miles away to a lonely spot where he collected bundles of wood each day and loaded up his disciples with them. By selling these in a nearby village, he was able to provide for his needs and also offer a little bread to anyone who might come to him. Okay, so that was this week's On March the Saints. You got 10 more chapters of Saint Hilarion the Great, and we will pick it up next Sunday. Y'all have a great week, and we will talk to y'all later.